Okay, we are live. We are going to start today with the fifth part of the short story that we have been reading from H.P. Lovecraft, which is the name of the story is Herbert West Reanimator. With me is Nicholas Strode. Hello, how are you, Nicholas?
I'm doing great this evening. Thanks for having me back. I'm so glad to be here and welcome everyone.
Okay, so um, first of all, I'm going to start sharing the screen. Then we're going to see the story. We're going to read it as we have been doing it. If someone joins in to the live stream, please do comment. If there is something that you want to mention, we will be here live reading the story. And if someone wants to talk, when someone wants to comment something, we are here to read and to comment. So first of all, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, there you go.
And what are we reading today, Pat?
Okay, today we're reading the fifth chapter, The Horror from the Shadows.
Excellent. Okay. And should I start or do you want to start?
Please do.
Okay. Many men have related hideous things not mentioned in print, which happened on the battlefields of the Great War. Some of these things have made me faint. Others have convulsed me with devastating nausea, while still others have made me tremble and look behind me in the dark. Yet despite the worst of them, I believe I can myself relate the most hideous thing of all, the shocking, the unnatural, the unbelievable horror from the shadows.
In 1915, I was a physician with the rank of first lieutenant in a Canadian regiment in Flanders, one of the many Americans to precede the government itself into the gigantic struggle. I had not entered the army on my own initiative, but rather as a natural result of the enlistment of the man whose indispensable assistant I was, the celebrated Boston surgical specialist, Dr. Herbert West. Dr. West had been a bid for a chance to serve as surgeon in a great war, and when the chance had come, he carried me with him almost against my will. There were reasons why I would have been glad to let the war separate us. Reasons why I found the practice of medicine and the companionship of West more and more irritating. But when he had gone to Ottawa and through a colleague's influence, secure a medical commission as major, I could not resist the imperious persuasion of one determined that I should accompany him in my usual capacity.
When I say that Dr. West was avid to serve in battle, I do not mean to imply that he was either naturally warlike or anxious for the safety of civilization. Always an all ice cold intellectual machine, slight, blonde, blue eyed, and spectacled. I think he secretly sneered at my occasional martial enthusiasms and censures of supine neutrality. There was, however, something he wanted in the embattled Flanders, and in order to secure it, he had to assume a military exterior. What he wanted was not a thing which many persons want, but something connected with a peculiar branch of medical science which he had chosen quite clandestinely to follow, and in which he had achieved amazing and occasionally hideous results. It was, in fact, nothing more or less than an abundant supply of freshly killed men in every stage of dismemberment.
Herbert West needed fresh bodies because his life work was the reanimation of the dead. This work was not known to the fashionable clientele who had so swiftly built up his fame after his arrival in Boston, but was only too well known to me, who had been his closest friend and sole assistant since the old days in Miskatonic University Medical School of Arkham. It was it was in those college days that he had begun his terrible experiments, first on small animals and then on human bodies, shockingly obtained. There was a solution which he injected into the veins of dead things, and if they were fresh enough, they responded in strange ways. He had had much trouble in discovering the proper formula. For each type of organism was found the need of stimulus especially adapted to it. Terror stalked him when he reflected on his partial failures, nameless things resulting from imperfect solutions or from bodies insufficiently fresh. A certain number of these failures had remained alive. One was in an asylum, while others had vanished, and as he thought of conceivable yet virtually impossible eventualities, he often shivered beneath his usual stolidity.
West had soon learned that absolute freshness was the prime requisite for useful specimens, and had accordingly resorted to frightful and unnatural expedients in body snatching. In college, and during our early practice together in the factory town of Bolton, my attitude toward him had been largely one of fascinated admiration. But as his boldness in methods grew, I began to develop a gnawing fear. I did not like the way he looked at healthy living bodies. And then there came a nightmarish session in the cellar laboratory where I learned that a certain specimen had been a living body when he secured it. That was the first time he had ever been able to revive the quality of rational thought in a corpse, and his success, obtained at such loathsome cost, had completely hardened him.
Of his methods in the intervening 5 years I dare not speak. I was held to him by sheer force of fear, and witnessed sights that no human tongue could repeat. Gradually I came to find Herbert West himself more horrible than anything he did. That was when it dawned on me that his once normal scientific zeal of prolonging life has subtly degenerated, degenerated into a mere morbid and ghoulish curiosity and secret sense of charnel picturesqueness. His interest became a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. He gloated calmly over artificial monstrosities which will make most healthy men drop dead from fright and disgust. He became, behind his pallid intellectuality, a fastidious baudelaire of physical experiment, a languid Elagabalus of the tombs.
Dangers he met unflinchingly, crimes he committed unmoved. I think the climax came when he had proved his point that rational life can be restored, and had sought new worlds to conquer by experimenting on the reanimation of detached parts of bodies. He had wild and original ideas on the independent vital properties of organic cells and nerve tissue separated from natural physiological systems, and achieved some hideous preliminary results in the form of never dying, artificially nourished tissue obtained from the nearly hatched eggs of an indescribable tropical reptile. Two biological points he was exceedingly anxious to settle. First, whether any amount of consciousness and rational action be possible without the brain, proceeding from the spinal cord and various nervous systems. And second, whether any kind of ethereal, intangible relation distinct from the material cells may exist to link the surgically separated parts of what has previously been a single living organism. All this research work required a prodigious supply of freshly slaughtered human flesh, and that was why Herbert West had entered the Great War.
The phantasmal, unmentionable thing occurred one midnight late in March 1915 in a field hospital behind the lines of St. Louis. I wonder, even now, if it could have been other than a demoniac dream of delirium. West had a private laboratory in an east room of a barn like temporary edifice, assigned him on his plea that he was devising new and radical methods for the treatment of hitherto hopeless, hopelessness case of maiming. There he worked like a butcher in the midst of his gory wares. I could never get used to the levity with which he handled and classified certain things. At times, he actually did perform marvels of surgery for the soldiers, but his chief delights were of a less public and philanthropic kind, requiring many explanations of sounds, which seems peculiar even amidst that babble of the damned. Among these sounds were frequent revolver shots, surely not uncommon on the battlefield, but distinctly uncommon in a hospital. Dr. West's reanimated specimens were not meant for long existence or a large audience. Besides human tissue, West employed much of erectile embryo tissue which he had cultivated, with such singular results. It was better than human material for maintaining life in organless fragments, and that was now my friend's chief activity. In a dark corner of the laboratory, over a queer incubated burner, he kept a large covered vat, full of this reptilian cell matter, which multiplied and grew puffily and hideously.
On the night of which I speak, we had a splendid new specimen, a man at once physically powerful and of such high mentality that a sensitive nervous system was assured. It was rather ironic, for he was the officer who had helped West to his commission, and who was now to have been our associate. Moreover, he had in the past secretly studied the theory of reanimation to some extent under West. Major Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee, DSO, was the greatest surgeon in our division, and had been hastily assigned to the St. Eloi sector when news of the heavy fighting reached headquarters. He had come in an aeroplane piloted by the intrepid Lieutenant Ronald Hill, only to be shot down when directly over his destination. The fall had been spectacular and awful. Hill was unrecognizable afterward, but the wreck yielded up the great surgeon in a nearly decapitated but otherwise intact condition. West had greedily seized the lifeless thing which had once been his friend and fellow scholar, and I shuddered when he finished severing the head, placed it in his hellish vat of pulpy reptile tissue to preserve it for future experiments, and proceeded to treat the decapitated body on the operating table. He injected new blood, joined certain veins, arteries, and nerves at the headless neck, and closed the ghastly aperture with engrafted skin from an unidentified specimen which had borne an officer's uniform. I knew what he wanted, to see if this ghastly organized body could exhibit without its head any of the signs of mental life which had distinguished Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee. Once a student of reanimation, this silent trunk was now gruesomely called upon to exemplify it.
I can still see Herbert West under the sinister electric light as he injected his reanimating solution into the arm of the headless body. The scene I cannot describe. I should faint if I try it, for there is madness in a room full of classified charnel things, with blood and lesser human debris almost ankle deep on the slimy floor, and with hideous reptilian abnormalities sprouting, bubbling, and baking over a winking bluish green spectrum of dim flame in a far corner of black shadows.
The specimen, as West repeatedly observed, had a splendid nervous system. Much was expected of it, and as a few twitching motions began to appear, I could see the feverish interest on West's face. He was ready, I think, to see proof of his increasingly strong opinion that consciousness, reason, and personality can exist independently of the brain, that man has no central connective spirit, but is merely a machine of nervous matter, each section more or less complete in itself. In one triumphant demonstration, West was about to relegate the mystery of life to the category of myth. The body now twitched more vigorously, and beneath our avid eyes commenced to heave in a frightful way. The arms stirred disquietingly, the legs drew up, and various muscles contracted in a repulsive kind of writhing. Then the headless thing threw out its arms in a gesture which was unmistakably of desperation, an intelligent desperation apparently sufficient to prove every theory of Herbert West. Certainly, the nerves were recalling the man's last act in life, the struggle to get free of the falling aeroplane.
What followed, I shall never positively know. It may have been wholly an hallucination from the shock caused at that instant by the sudden and complete destruction of the building in a cataclysm of German shell fire. Who can gainsay it? Since West and I were the only proved survivors, West liked to think that before his recent disappearance, but there were times when he could not. For it was queer that we both had the same hallucination. The hideous occurrence itself was very simple, notable only for what it implied.
The body on the table had risen with a blind and terrible groping, and we had heard a sound. I should not call that sound a voice, for it was too awful. And yet its timbre was not the most awful thing about it. Neither was its message. It merely screamed, "Jump, Ronald! For God's sake, jump!" The awful thing was its source.
For it had come from the large covered bed in that ghoulish corner of crawling black shadows.
Yeah.
Wow. Just
Yeah.
wow. I mean, that was something. I mean, that part, I was just like at the edge of my seat when I was reading that.
Yeah, I really liked it, and for me, it really felt like a big step forward because I was just expecting a bunch of zombies, and I'm kind of tired of zombies, to be honest. Um, but
But
here,
it was implied. It was implied, but it wasn't said because it just said, I'm sorry, it was said that there was lots of their failures running around.
right, but I was expecting this whole story about the Reanimator to just be, he resurrects some animals and then he resurrects some people, right? And he makes these zombies. But this idea of this ghoulish vat of reptile flesh that's taken from this unnameable reptile egg, and this idea that the head on its own is reanimated in it, for me, that's another step beyond the creativity of zombies, because there's this separation. Like, it's even more horrible than just being reanimated, that you would be reanimated in these pieces. And I think we see the clear inspiration for in the film Hill. I think Hill was his name, Dr. Hill.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, and the other person in the aeroplane's name is Hill in the story, but it's Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee that is decapitated in this and reanimated separately from his body.
Yeah, I could see that as well. It's like, okay, at last I have another resource that they were using in the movie, and they got it from somewhere. So at least I'm glad that they read the whole story.
Yeah.
They read the whole story. So what I felt this time is that at last I have a better view of how Herbert West is as a person. I don't know if you could felt it, but I could feel how cruel he is.
Yeah.
How, like, I should say that he is cold-hearted in this time. Like, reading.
Yeah, he's
Uh huh.
Yeah, he's definitely cold in this one. I felt like the real, like, it was getting freakier and freakier, but in the last chapter when he actually kills someone in order to do his experiment, I thought that was a departure from anything that could be considered good. But then now he's gone even further, where he's just fascinated with what he can do. It's not about resurrecting people or helping people or anything like that. He's just interested in studying this morbid curiosity.
Exactly. And I don't know if it's the same part. I'm sorry, if it's the that part that we were reading just now, linked to the last chapter when the narrator was saying that he actually killed someone, what you said before, right? Is it the one connected to the last part of the last chapter, that he couldn't kill that person, and the narrator now is implying that Herbert West actually killed him later?
I don't think so. I think the idea is that when he said, "Hey, I have this fresh body and I've kept it fresh with this magical embalming fluid,"
Mm-hmm.
I think that he was just giving it some sort of a drug to keep it
No,
asleep,
I
and
know.
then he killed. Oh, okay.
I know. The thing is that in this chapter, the narrator said that he really was he really he felt fear, or he was like just don't feel he wasn't feeling this guy because he actually killed an specimen or a thing. He killed something there in the in the laboratory. So I am thinking, or I'm guessing, that it might have been the guy that he tried to kill, or he tried to, let's say, plan the part in front of his assistant, and then because he got up, he decided to kill him. So I don't know if that has to do, like, there is a connection, and that's when his assistant start thinking differently. I'm
Oh, his fear of West. Yeah, yeah. I think there's definitely that, but I think it was mentioned in the last chapter, and I think it's mentioned again at how covetously West is starting to look at living people. Uh,
Yeah, that part was really important,
yeah,
because
yeah.
he is not, as what we were saying in the last chapters, those things, they were mentioned as things or monsters or objects. They are losing, they're losing life, so they're just objects. And I feel that's how Herbert West was looking at people. They're not
Hmm,
even
hmm.
humans anymore. They're just objects that he needs to study.
Yeah, yeah. I take the same message from it. I think that he just discounts. He just doesn't care that they're people. They have become objects to him. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So that was really important to rescue from this chapter, and I'm really glad that that the narrator start having certain feelings. So I can now see how Herbert West is. Now I can feel that he is really cruel, and it's just, I don't know, it
That
doesn't give
that's
me
right.
the
Yeah.
it doesn't give me like the good vibes in this chapter. Like, until the last one, I felt that it was like, I shouldn't say that it wasn't. I don't know how to say that. I mean, I don't want to like say, oh well, it's just the normal experiment and he failed, and oh, poor scientist, he needs to try it again. But maybe he was not the bad guy at all. He was just
Oh,
trying
okay.
to do something pro something. But in this chapter, you could definitely see how dark his mind is now,
Yeah.
how he's lost in his own thoughts.
Yeah, I found this really interesting that he is eager to rush into war, but not for the valorous reasons that so many people were eager to rush into war. It's not trying to protect his society or that he wants to fight or anything like that. But he's just like, yes, more chances for body parts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, he's forgetting about anything else. It's like, okay, it's like acting a part. right? It's like, okay, I'm acting like a good guy, but then what I really want to do, it has to serve the purpose.
Right.
So, oh, that's really creepy. That's really creepy. What else? The other part was the extent of the testing. It seems like at this point, Herbert West have tested so many times that he had already, let's say, um, managed to have a successful approach to this potion and or the solution, right? So that's why he's changing his views. So before, we just thought that the only thing that Herbert West wanted was to like get the correct solution or get the
Mm-hmm.
correct potion, and that's it. Like, let's reanimate someone or an object and see if it can react, or if it still had like something there,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But now he's starting to be like more like into it and trying to work with tissues and with um one of the things that they were mentioning here, which was also interesting, was about proving that tissues and organs could work without the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how do they put it? They say each section more or less complete in itself. In one triumphant demonstration, West was about to relegate the mystery of life to the category of myth.
Mm-mm.
So whereas before it seemed like he was trying to return something to life, now he's disproving life as a thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like he changed completely the way that he was looking at the experiment at first. And that's interesting because I don't know when he changed it. Is it when he went into war and he was dealing with all of that, that he, because usually war changes you, right?
Yeah.
It changes the way that you see things. And maybe in this case that's why he changed. I don't know.
Perhaps I think we might look back at saying, and his success obtained at such a loathsome cost, which was killing that one traveler, had completely hardened him. And so we might look at, rather than going into the war as changing him, maybe his murder being the thing that really
Mm,
changed.
okay.
But I think that there's another thing to this, in that his success, I think, changed him. I think that this character, Herbert West, no matter how much success he gets, he's just going to learn more horrible things, and then have more horrible questions, and then conduct more horrible experiments to learn horrible things. I think this is inevitable for him, that his every success in this forbidden world is going to drag him deeper to hell.
Wow. Yeah, because every time that he is like answering something, he questions himself again, and that's why he start doing some other experiments.
Yeah. I thought again the reanimated decapitated head, I
Hmm.
thought was especially horrible, and it reminded me of a hadith. Do you know what Islamic hadith are?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
So in Christianity, there's the Bible, right?
Hmm.
But in Islam, there's the Quran, but there are also the hadith, and those are sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
And some of them are held on almost the same level as the Quran, and so you can't really understand Islam without understanding Hadith. And there's one, Sahih al-Bukhari 56:6. The Prophet said, "Nobody who dies and finds good from Allah in the hereafter would wish to come back to this world, even if he were given the whole world and whatever is in it, except the martyr, on seeing the superiority of martyrdom, would like to come back to the world and get killed again in Allah's cause." So the idea is, Muhammad says that the best thing, like heaven is just the best. So if you get any portion of heaven, you're never going to want to come back to life, unless you were martyred, because martyrdom is so awesome. Martyrdom is way better than even heaven, that you'd want to come back and be killed again.
Oh.
Yeah. And so it's definitely a certain perspective, but it made me think of this. I thought instead we might say that one that dies violently, that no one that dies violently could be more terrified, except the reanimated, who upon being partially resurrected in pieces, endures the terrors of dying all over again. So like, imagine dying in a plane crash, how horrible that would be. It seems like nothing could be more horrible, except being reanimated in pieces and reliving that horror.
Yeah. I mean, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That's terrible. And I have let's say a true story about that, but
Okay.
it wasn't someone that died, but it was someone that I knew, or that I know, let's say, that passed. Well, she was in an accident, and she was in the hospital. She was really bad injured, and when I went to see her, she was reviving the accident every
She was
time.
reliving the accident. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but she was unconscious. She was unconscious, and you can see her grinding her teeth, trying to scream, moaning, trying to grab something, twitching, and then going back to, let's say, an unconscious
Yeah, that's
step.
horrible. My
Yeah.
gosh.
So this is really interesting, even though this is the true story don't, but it's related to something that it's really catastrophic, or that really hurt you at certain point, that you'll start reliving it again and again and again, especially
Yeah.
if your brain was damaged.
Yeah.
And that was that what happened, that happened to her.
That's really horrible that happened to your friend, but that would make a good subject for a story. That's so
Yeah.
horrible. Yeah.
I mean, the story is even more, it's really sad, because it was the first time that she was traveling with friends.
Oh.
And she was traveling to the beach, and it was the last time that she was going to see her friends, because she was accepted to the United States. So she was going to travel with her parents to live there. She was a prolific singer, and she loved to play the piano. She was a really talented girl. And after that, she couldn't even eat by herself. Yeah, she was like, she lost completely her sense. I cannot explain it. I mean, if you will see it, you'll see the horror of her mother face every time that she looks at her and
Yeah.
revives all of this. So, but the thing, I mean, going back, it's like, if you pass a really terrible experience and you manage to live, that you will definitely be reviving that over and over again.
Yeah, you definitely will relive it. Yeah, that trauma.
Exactly. So I could definitely relate that those last words will have been said by this corpse. But the strange thing is that Herbert West managed to have this head to work with the body that wasn't connected.
Yep.
But then it got that. I mean, I still try to understand, because I think he only injected the solution in the body.
Yes, that's right.
But not.
He just does the work, and it said that he puts it in the vat, just to preserve it for later. And so I think it's a little bit unclear, because this tissue does seem to reanimate things. But I think it's a little bit unclear. But he doesn't put any of the solution in the head, and so it's not quite clear whether or not there's this. But I think there is definitely supposed to be a magical connection between these two things.
But remember that it was also in Doctor Hill's way of decapitating, and this time I'm talking about the movie,
Hmm.
right? So in this case, I think he was also using blood. I think where he was putting his head, right?
Well, he doesn't give the head any blood. He gives the body new blood. He links all the veins and the arteries and
I don't know,
closes
but
the aperture.
I know, but the thing is, in the movie
In the film, yes,
and the
he
film, he's putting some blood as well in that like cube that the head was in.
That's right. And there's a
Hmm.
specific scene where he's been reanimated for a while, and it seems almost like the head is dying or something like that. And then more blood gets put into that pan, and it seems to
Hmm.
like drink it in and to be alive. Reminds me of in the Odyssey when Odysseus goes to the barrier, like the edge of Hades' house,
Hmm.
and speaks with the dead. It's all of these dead spirits that need to drink blood in order to sort of possess any sort of vitality and express themselves clearly. And so we see that again in the film. Yeah.
Well, I think that comes from like it comes from religion as well. It's like they said that the demons were like having all of this vitality by drinking blood. I think that comes like from
Yeah.
these old stories.
And I think in the ancient mind, the soul exists almost as wind in the veins. Because the most obvious way to see somebody die is to just watch them bleed out, right? You're going to see that all the time in war and things like that. And you see the person's body seems perfectly healthy, their blood runs out, and then they're dead. And so it seems like the life is in the blood itself, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
Yeah.
That's why they said that if you drink it, you'll
Hmm.
have vitality. Yes,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Mm.
What did you think about the location in Flanders Fields?
Um, well, I can relate it to much. Maybe because I don't know exactly where it is. It
Okay, have you heard the Canadian poem in Flanders Fields?
no.
Oh, okay. Maybe this is something that's more commonly known in Canada because it was
Hmm.
written by a Canadian. But in Flanders Fields is a really famous poem uh, by John McCrae, who died a year or two afterwards, and he was in this camp, and he saw this field of graves, and he saw all these poppies growing up, and so he wrote this little poem. He was a doctor as well. It says, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep though poppies grow in Flanders fields."
It's
So
like a cemetery.
that's right. It was a war cemetery
Uh huh.
because Flanders, yeah, as is mentioned in this story, is this really bloody battlefield. Um,
Okay.
and
Okay.
so,
Now I can see the.
yeah, yeah, and I bet you it's probably more famous. It was probably more famous closer to World War I, and it's probably more famous in North America than throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that this was like an obvious thing. Like obviously he had read the poem, Lovecraft had read the poem, and he thought that this would be a good place uh, to set this story. And I felt like it gave it a lot of realism. And there's this line in Flanders Fields, "We shall not sleep," which I think the idea is that we're not going to have proper rest in the afterlife, but uh, to a mind like Lovecraft's, maybe he's thinking about them actually rising up and being like, "Hey, you're supposed to fight." And I took that as the only reason why the story has moved forward 5 years. I felt like he wanted to set this in
Mm-hmm.
uh, World War One, uh,
Okay.
which I think would have been so alive in everyone's mind in 1921, 1922, 1923. Everybody would have been thinking about that as the most horrific thing that had ever happened, right?
Yeah.
And so again, we see this idea where he says, people can't really relate about all these horrible things, but some things have been in print, and I just can't repeat them. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, the thing that I experienced is worse than the war. So it's like the most horrible, hellish thing that you can imagine. This story is worse.
Yeah. I mean, that's in this case, he used that resource, which is, I'm guessing that the people that knew about it, I mean, that really felt the war, was, I don't know, was immersed into this story. I'm guessing, like feeling the horror of the narrator where they was saying
Sure.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we can only think about all of the stories because of what we have read or what we have seen in the images, but actually, the people that felt that were seeing that could really relate.
Yeah, I think so, but it might be more terrifying for the people that didn't go and from Lovecraft's perspective and just saw what came back, because you would have had all these people that went off healthy, and then so many didn't come back. But the few that did come back, a lot of them would have been horribly maimed. They would have been missing limbs and things like that, and some of them would have been
Yeah,
so traumatized that they would have almost been like zombies. Um, and so
yeah.
I often wonder about that, which would be worse, like the imagining what everyone went through and actually going through it.
Mm. Well, you can imagine. It depends on your imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But then, if you're living it, then you know what happened,
Yeah, which I think you're right. It's probably worse.
and especially if you're living it like 24/7, like you are in war. You
Yeah.
cannot rest. You cannot enjoy. You must be like in tension, stress, like
Mm-hmm.
24/7. You cannot even sleep.
That reminds me of the film. Maybe we're getting sidetracked here, but
Mm-mm.
Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
Did you see that one?
No.
Oh, it's so good. It's kind of a surreal view on the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Um, and there's this guy that needs to go in and do an assassination mission in Vietnam. But it begins with this amazing monologue uh, about this. I forget what he is, what his rank in the army is, but he's not on duty. He's in Saigon. So he's been on plenty of missions, and he's an assassin. But at this present time, he's just waiting in a hotel. He's not been given any orders or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he is just going out of his mind. And he gives this awesome monologue about how, like, at first he wakes up and he's just shocked and he thinks that like it's time for war. And then he's like, shit, I'm still only in Saigon. And then he starts talking about how he wants to go back into war. That every moment that he's waiting in that hotel, he gets weaker. And every moment that Charlie is crouching in the bush, Charlie gets stronger. And I like that one monologue tells you so much about the sort of addiction of
Mm-hmm.
being in war, where you don't really leave the battlefield. It comes with you.
Wow. I mean, I'm guessing that's why all of these people that went into war, they really have this psychic, like they are, they psychic change, like their
Yeah,
mind change.
yeah,
That's terrible. And that's why I was thinking about maybe Herbert West changing because of the war, but then again, it's true. Maybe he was already changing because his experiments were like almost 24/7 for him.
yeah. It is interesting that that we don't see him injecting anything into himself. Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no, that's why I mean relating it to the movie, because in the movie we could see that he was injecting himself, and it will give us the impression that he already mastered the way that he was using the solution or the potion, and maybe he already knew how to, like, you know inject it into him to make it feel like better and awaken. And but in here it doesn't seem like that.
right. Yeah, I'm really excited for the sequel.
But we have to see it, like we have to see what happened, because they should have like check again the resources and try to do something new. I don't know, hopefully.
Yeah, it seems like they've taken so much that it's got to be just an original story. I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see how they would get anything from this story in that,
Mm.
but we'll see.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We don't know. We're still debating, but let's have our hopes. I mean, because at least in here, I could say that they decided to read the whole story and they grabbed certain resources, like s- let's not say that they were explaining it in the movie about having different. I mean, having the body separated by from the head and make it work, right? They didn't explain it that way. They make it seem like the potion was already set, that it was already done, that it was perfect already.
Hmm. Yeah, he
So
wasn't like I don't remember him making any alterations to the formula in the film.
no, I mean, the only thing that he was like doing was in the cat at first, and then on himself, because he already did it, or he was already doing it, and then he directly jumped into corpse, and
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, oh, I lost it. Darn. I had something in my head, but I've lost it.
Don't worry, it will come back. What else?
Oh, that was it. Okay. So in the film,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hill that gets decapitated earlier in the film, he seems to have some sort of a magical power where he stares into someone's eyes and he says things in a certain way, and he almost compels them. Like you could sort of see them shift a little bit. Do you remember
Mm-hmm.
that at all?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And I haven't seen any of that in this story so far, but maybe the closest thing would be in this description that the narrator suggests that he can't resist being called into war as his assistant. He says, I could not resist the imperious persuasion of one determined that I should accompany him in my usual capacity. Uh,
But that was also mentioned. I think it was on in the second chapter, when he was saying that he felt. I mean, the narrator felt that Herbert West was putting him on a spell.
oh, okay, okay.
Okay, but it was directly into Herbert West, but not Dr. Hill. So I'm guessing that they moved that, let's say in quotes, magical, or
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, spell, like being for Dr. Hill, but not for Herbert West.
Yeah, yeah. That like in the film, Hill had it, and
Exactly.
in this story, the only person that I've seen sort of have it is Herbert West.
Yeah, but going back to the film, Herbert West had like some sort of power over the one that was with him as the assistant.
Oh, you think
Because
so? Okay.
because I still remember that he was like, in certain points, like he was like pushing. Like, remember when he came into the house because he wanted to rent it with him, and um this guy's girlfriend was like, no, you shouldn't rent him, he doesn't look like
Right.
a good person, blah blah blah. And he was like, "Yeah, you're going to rent it. Here's the money. Do it."
Yeah, well, I agree that he was coercive and he was forceful, and he was manipulative, but it didn't seem like a magical thing at all in the film. Like he's using blackmail and things like that. He's
Yeah,
saying,
exactly. It wasn't a spell, but it
yeah,
was some sort of like it was enforcing himself.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
one that really had the spell was Hill.
yeah,
Was it
yeah.
Dr. Hill? Yes. Hmm. I wonder. I really wonder, and I'm going to ask you something. How would you think this last phrase that this corpse say it out loud could sound like? Do you think it sounds more like a humanish type of like pronunciation, or it will be like a monster type, or like
I
I don't know.
I read it as a human, but I don't think that it could be properly represented. I think that's kind of the point. I think that it's supposed to be so horrible that you can't imagine it. It says,
Hmm.
"I should not call that sound a voice, for it was too awful." And yet, its timbre was not the most awful thing about it. Neither was its message. It had merely screamed. The awful thing was its source. And so I take this, and maybe I'm reading too much of this into Lovecraft, but often when he's describing something, I expect that in Lovecraft's mind, it's something that can't be imagined. And so something like one of these creatures screaming or howling in an unnatural voice, I don't think that it can be described. Like the lizard thing that he got these eggs from, I think it says nameless.
Hmm.
And I think he really does mean that, in that like we have not identified what this reptilian thing is. And I think that like that's Lovecraft's fascination, and I think something that he does well that can get boring fairly quickly, in that he is talking about how this is worse than what can be in print. This is worse than what you can imagine. This is worse than a picture you could draw. This is worse than anything you could articulate with your mind. And that's one of the blessedly is that this story that
Hmm.
just let me just see the story. I think it was this story that talks about one of the greatest things about consciousness is that we can't assemble all of we like all of the aspects of what we know. That might be a different from a different story that I heard a quote from, but
Hmm.
uh, this idea that not being able to fully understand is a mercy, because if you fully understood, it would be just so incredibly horrible.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, again, maybe I'm reading this too much into it, but I
Hmm.
get the sense that Lovecraft's always trying to talk about that thing that's just out of reach, that the thing that's just out of reach is more terrifying than the thing that you touch.
But it's easier, right? It's easier to play with the mind,
Yeah,
to writing it down, because it will give you too much descriptions. Because the only way to make you feel that you're in horror, that you're in pain, or that it's something like that, it will hurt you, or it will, I don't know, it will scare you. It's by knowing what you fear. I mean, what are your fears? And actually, the author doesn't know it. So
yeah,
the only way that he can play with it, I mean, maybe it's like repetitive and he's using it all the time. But the only way it could be like it's the worst thing that you can ever imagine. Maybe what you're thinking is not, well, it is true. The way that you think is not the way that I think.
hmm,
So maybe what you fear is not the same that I could fear. So
yeah.
that's
Yeah. I think you make two good points there. In that, one, it actually can be weaker in not having the description. I
mhm.
remember I was watching a film. I don't remember the name of the film. It had Ben Kingsley in it, and it was obviously trying to talk about childlike wonder. The beginning of the story was Ben Kingsley took these two children and he was like, "Oh, this I'm going to take you on a journey that's more wonderful than you can imagine," or something like that. I don't remember the details of it. This was years ago that I saw it,
Mhm.
and Sorry. The sorry, my laptop restarted and started a YouTube video for me.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I was totally distracted. Oh yeah. I think you make two good points in that. One, not giving us the distraction is not very interesting. And I was using the example of that film in that it was building up all of this wonder, and it wasn't interesting to me at all because I had no confidence that the filmmakers had anything wonderful in mind, and so I wasn't really excited to learn what this wonderful thing was. Because every time that they didn't tell me what this wonderful thing was, I was like, okay, I'm going to find this disappointing when it comes to it.
Exactly. And that's the thing, that instead of saying it all over again, you just have to like let it go and just leave that unsaid, just for the ones that are reading, the ones that are actually leaving the story, to have their imagination set up to this.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and I think that is a good point, and that goes along with your second point that you made earlier, and that the things that would scare each of us and that we could each imagine would be different. And so if you were to describe anything, then for one person it might be scary, but for another person it might not.
Exactly.
And this gives us a great opportunity to use our imaginations, and I think that might be why he inspired so many writers. That it tells you to use your imagination and tell the story yourself. Complete what is this horrible thing.
Exactly.
It reminds me of a film that I saw, My Dinner with Andre. Have you ever heard of that one?
No.
It is probably the strangest film I've ever seen. I watched it, and I watched it because I was interested that it had an actor in it that I really liked, and it was apparently famous among artistic circles. And in it begins with the one character is going through the city, and he's having a voiceover monologue in his head, talking about what he's thinking about and what he's worried about and where he's going to go and what he thinks of Andre. And I remember I was watching it with a friend, and I was like, this is so weird. Like, a voiceover is one of those don'ts. You just don't do that in a film. Like, everybody laughs at voiceovers like that. You always want to have on the screen the person interacting with other people you show. You don't just have it in their head. That's the most boring way, and it's the hardest way for the actors to express themselves because it's only their voice.
Exactly.
And then it went on to the film, and he goes and he has this dinner with Andre, and it's like a full-length film. It's like 2 hours, and the film is him sitting there talking to his friend, and his friend talking about all these little adventures that he'd been on. But it doesn't cut away, and it doesn't show you these adventures. It's just two men at a table talking about these things. And I was so confused. I thought, like, it was interesting stories and things like that, but why would they make this film this way? Did the people that made this film not have any idea how to make a film? But the whole point of it was to force the audience to use their imaginations. It was like reading a book rather than watching a film, in that everything was being described to you through words, but you weren't being shown it. The things that you were being shown were the most boring things in the world.
Wow, that's really strange.
It is weird, yeah.
What time was this film?
My Dinner with Andre. I'll look up what the date was. I think the 90s or the 80s.
Maybe they were trying to experiment with something new. I am wondering if that same director had another movie done, to be honest.
Yeah, well, it was 1981, and yes, well, that's what they were doing. They were trying to tell this story, and rather than a normal film, especially today, we just have everything told to us and everything's on the screen, right? But what they were trying to do in this film was they were trying to force the audience to use their imagination while watching a movie,
which is kind of strange, right?
It's weird, yeah, but it's interesting too.
Yeah, but the typical that you have someone that doesn't follow the rules, went to school and said, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this," and then that person is saying, "I'm going to break the rules and I'm going to show you that I can earn money from this." There you go. And I'm
Yeah,
guessing that he may have earned certain amount of money. I don't think.
I don't know. I have suspicions that it was a box office success, but I know it was popular among artistic crowds, and it was directed by. Uh,
Or maybe the director did it on purpose and wanted to show the nose of a film in a movie.
no, he wasn't, because I've watched interviews with him.
Hmm.
Um, Written by Andre Gregory and Wallace Shawn. Wallace Shawn is the actor that I was interested in. Did you ever
Okay.
see The Princess Bride?
Uh no, I don't think so.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Well, he was the actor that I was interested in seeing. Yeah, and so Wallace Shawn, and so the whole point of this from these two guys was they wanted to make this. So describes his The idea for the film arose from Gregory's effort to work with a biographer on his life story, and Sean simultaneously coming up with the idea for a story about two people having a conversation. um, uh, so it should be filmed rather than produced as a play.
So that means that instead of writing a biography or autobiography, he just did it in the movie. That's it.
Yeah, it looks like that was one of the things. Yeah, but I remember watching interviews with it and the style of it, because you could have done the same thing where you would have it in a typical movie. Like if you have a biographical film, you're going to show the person doing this and doing that. And you're going to have all these different scene changes and everything like that. You're not going to have two men talking
Okay.
about it, at a table.
Mm-mm.
Uh, you should even just look at some of the shots of the film, because it's so perplexingly boring. And the point is that they want to give you pretty much nothing to look at so that you're using your imagination.
Really?
Yeah, that's the whole point of it. And I think that's what I think that is part of the style of Lovecraft, at least in this Lovecraft, where things are unnameable and indescribable and worse than you can put in print, and like sounds that you cannot describe, like that. All of that. I think the idea is that Lovecraft thinks that is more horrible than anything that he could say, and also it invites you to investigate the horror, to think about the horror. It's not just a bump in the night, but it is what is that horrible thing in the night that is indescribable.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but in this case, you're only reading it. I mean, going back to what you were saying in the movie, you are watching something.
No, you're not. But that's the thing is
Right.
in the film, you're just watching two people talk.
Exactly. It's like, why? I mean, what? You want me to close my eyes and feel that it's an audiobook that I'm listening to?
Almost, yeah. That's the thing. As I remember in one interview, them talking about it as being like a book. It's so weird. Like I don't think they ever should do that again. But it was an interesting artistic choice.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I wouldn't even think about, you know, getting a story like that into a movie. Well, I wouldn't even understand it, at least now.
I think a lot of people didn't understand it. Yeah,
Mm.
and when I watched it, I didn't understand. I was very confused, because I was like, do these people not know how to make a film? Like, so it went right over my head.
Don't
But
tell me that you watch it completely.
oh yeah, totally, I watched it. Yeah.
Wow.
It was actually kind of surprising at how fast it went by. And it was an
Uh-huh.
entertaining film, because the stories that they're talking about are interesting. But it was just so perplexing. I think that was something else that kept us on our seat, is it was such a strange film. It was so weird.
Or maybe you were waiting for something to go. I mean,
Yeah,
to
we're
go
trying to
out, right?
understand, like, Like, there's no way that you could make a Hollywood film and be this inept and be this bad.
Wow.
And that sort of brings us back full circle to this story, Herbert West, which definitely does employ a lot of that use your imagination, because I can't describe it. It's worse than you can imagine. And again, we've talked about how he didn't like this, and how this is, I saw one quote pretty much universally identified as his worst work.
I'm still debating about that.
Yeah, I have
I'm
a
still
feeling I'm going to
debating.
disagree. Yeah, when I read other stuff, I'm sure I'm going to find something that I don't like as much as this, because this was really good.
Yeah, this was really good, and I'm feeling grateful that we are reading it not as quickly as we wanted to do it. I mean, it's just
Sure, yeah.
it's been paused. We're reading it every week, and it just makes you feel the anxiety of trying to read the other part, but you don't, because you have to like go in order. I'm sorry, I had to say it, but but it's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, the whole story itself, even though it was written like in different times, it's really interesting because you don't tend to lose yourself, or you are not losing anything that happened before, because everything that the story has, it can be in only one chapter.
Right.
You have the whole story maybe sipped or explained in the first 2 or 3 chapters. Well, in this case, it didn't actually mention it there, but I think it was like on the fourth or third it started to look like doing the summary. But you can
Mm-hmm.
you can tell you can tell what these guys have been doing, and how Herbert West have been like involved into these crazy experiments. And it's still been mentioned certain things from the first chapters, but unless, like, it's not as much.
Yeah, and I really liked it. And when I was out, I went ahead. You're kind of making fun of me because I accidentally went ahead and read the
Ah,
sixth part. But when I was reading the sixth part, obviously they begin with a summary again, and I was thinking about how much it's like a story pitch or a story treatment, in that a writer will submit the basic ideas and basic plot points of a story
mm-hmm.
before they write it. So, for instance, in Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry would have an idea for an episode, and he would say something like, "Okay, Captain Kirk is going to come up against this really ugly enemy, but they're going to find out that even though the enemy is ugly, that it is capable of having peace with them, and that he can overcome their differences and things like that, and that not killing this ugly enemy is actually going to be the solution to the story." And so Gene Roddenberry would write that, and then he would pass it on to a writer, and a writer would actually write the whole script. And so he'd be like, okay, like scene opens, fade
Mm-hmm.
in, captain's log, star date, and so somebody else would write in all those details. And that's kind of what it reminded me of with these summaries, is like a story treatment like that, or a story
Yeah.
pitch.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way to like get into the story. Imagine yourself just being told that, for instance, in this chapter, that these two guys are in war and they are experimenting from out of nowhere
Mm-hmm,
with a
mm-hmm.
corpse,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You don't know anything. It's like, even and even if you have been reading the other stories, I mean, the other chapters, you still need some sort of connection.
Yeah,
So
it is really nice. It really gives you a refresher. And it also, because he writes it differently, obviously, it's not just the same thing written again. It gives you another chance at the perspective of what's happened. And so, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And that's what I like in this chapter. As I said before, you can definitely see how the narrator changed. Now he's showing
Mm-hmm.
his true self. At least he's trying to show that he's irritated. That he even said that he was like forced to be with Herbert West.
Hmm. Hmm.
even though at first it was his friend, but
Yeah.
then it was considered the assistant. And then it's like he lost respect, or he lost, I mean, this relationship that they had between Herbert West and him or her. And rather that, it just came like into a way of saying, I'm fearful of you. I am, I'm scared of what
Yeah.
you are planning to do later on. It's like, what's your next step? Even though I am like bound to you, that I need to be with you, is like some sort of force or some sort of magical spell that it's like driving me to you, or with you in this case. um it's
And
still, he's still scared. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously there's that dehumanization and objectification that you're talking about that Herbert West has for all people. But again, if we think about what a friend is, what is a friend? A friend is somebody that you care about and that you will help, you know. And so the idea that he is terrible and he's terrified of West, and he wants to be separated by war from him. He'd be glad to. It says, "I'd be glad if we were separated by the war." But West brings him along anyway. He insists that he comes along. It's obvious that West is only concerned what he can get from his friend. And so he sort of turned his friend into this tool, this object, rather than this other person that he should love and respect and care about.
Exactly. And I think the other person also knows. Like, I know that, I mean, I could feel that the narrator is on the same, I mean, on the same page, but he cannot get out of it. I mean, he needs to be in it. I don't know why. It's like it feels like he needs to be all the way
You
until
feel
the
like
end.
the narrator also feels
Yeah, the narrator.
okay.
I mean, he feels that he needs to get away from Herbert West, but in a sense, let's say a morbid, like maybe thought, or I don't know, way of thinking. The narrator will still be with Herbert West until the end.
One other thing I'll mention is the order again. Uh, Again and again, Lovecraft seems to tell things in a sort of non-chronological way that I find kind of strange, but is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we see in the third to last paragraph that the uh, that the shellfire is mentioned. So he's talking about, hey, this thing that I'm about to describe, it might just have been a hallucination from we were so scared about the German shellfire.
Mm-hmm.
And the German shellfire is how the story ends, right? But that's not the last thing that he writes for this chapter. The last thing that he writes from the chapter is the horrible source of this sound, and so we're almost left to forget about the German shellfire, which ends the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so this disjointed way where he describes something that's going to happen later before what's happening now, it's effective, but it is a bit weird.
Hmm. Let me read it again. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm. Well, I think it's just like one of the ways that also Lovecraft, as you were saying, like he trying to make it look like that. Imagine this, but what I'm trying to tell you later, it's even worse than that, right?
Well, yeah, in terms of talking about yeah, like the idea that it's sort of interrupted and that it, like you can't quite examine it, that
Mhm.
it's really horrible. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. And also, there's this theme again, which we saw in the films that we saw, like
Mhm.
Reanimator and From Beyond, that I really, really like in this horror, where this idea that you are going insane because these things are so horrible, but also that the evidence is constantly destroyed. So they don't really know if that head made a sound because everything was destroyed by the German shell fire. Uh, you know, that if somebody asked him and he told this story, that he could just be crazy. I really like that returning theme. I think it's a great horror idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because now bringing the part of the hallucination, I think that I can also tell that the narrator is feeling that he is going crazy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's like going towards of what Herbert West is feeling.
Yeah. He's constantly talking about how this overriding fear is taking him and things. Yeah.
Hmm? Hmm.
And nerve-shattering scream, and he's always shuddering when Herbert West is doing anything. Yeah, he's being very traumatized.
Yeah, exactly. And especially because he doesn't. I mean, I don't think that he's asking Herbert West is like, do you have you seen the same thing that I saw? Like, is this for real? I wonder what would Herbert West's answer could be. It's like, yeah, it is real, or no, it was all in your head.
I think
Or maybe
I think
trying to change it.
I think he'd constantly be saying it was real. What followed, I shall never positively know. Um,
But it would have been like on Herbert West's interests, right?
oh, to lie to him, you mean? Like to what would be in Herbert West's interests?
For instance, it's like, okay, it was a success, or if it was a failure, it wasn't me, it was something that happened with the object. It wasn't me. But
Okay.
so it's so sad the fire take it out, like the fire disappear the evidence, right? So what else, what else?
I think it's interesting that this hero that has helped West, that's gotten
Mhm.
West into this position, uh, his last words, and when he's resurrected, his first words are concern for someone else. Jump, Ronald, for God's sake, jump. So we knew from the story that Hill, the other guy in the
Mhm.
plane, was just absolutely destroyed. He's unrecognizable. But that this Major Sir Eric Morland Clapham Lee, he was almost perfectly preserved, except he was almost totally decapitated. And so the jump, I think, is meant to suggest that the jump was helpful, and that he didn't take as much damage. He was still killed, but there's a better chance of surviving. And so this, the fact that his last concern and his first concern again is not like, oh my God, I'm going to die or something like that, or damn you or something like that, but his concern for his comrade. I think
Mhm.
it shows a special perversity that this person is being resurrected in the same way that Dr. Halsey is
Mhm.
a hero for fighting the typhoid illness, and he's not even concerned about the fame and everything.
Exactly.
Um, that it's that much worse that he's being resurrected. I think that the fact that this guy's last concern was for his fellow plane mate, or whatever you would say,
Mhm.
uh, it shows that this guy is a hero, and that it's even more horrible that he's being resurrected in parts.
And I think that's the strange part. Well, it will be always unknown for us for what the narrator, or sorry, about the author wanted to let us know in this case. But it's for every single thing that Herbert West have been successful on. It's something like that. It's a hero, and we felt really great things about that, or about them, and they became the worst thing that we could ever imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else? Mm-mm-mm.
His interest became a hellish and perverse addiction to the repellently and fiendishly abnormal. Yeah, so again, this idea that it's like an addiction and that he's being drawn into it.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it is interesting because I see these themes of like almost drug addiction or insanity, like the progression of some sort of a mental disease or disorder, uh, uh, being paralleled with this discovery of the horrible truth of reality.
Yeah.
Did you notice he says avid 3 times?
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing that he loved that word, or he wanted like to show a point.
Yeah, I didn't. It didn't seem to me to be intentional, but I thought it was interesting because avid's not a common word to use. It's a good word, but not a common one, and it's used 3 times in such a short entry. I would have. I think it myself as a writer, if I had been editing this, which he would have had to edit it, I would have
Have
noticed
to
that.
take that out.
Yeah, I would have changed that. Yeah, and look for something else. I'm curious why he didn't.
Well, we have to maybe check on the ways that they were doing the checking in these short stories. Maybe they thought that that was okay, and they shouldn't be taking that out. It was allowed. It didn't sound it bad at that time.
Yeah, I think it's right on the edge where I think it's fine. Like I'm not going to say it's a mistake to use it 3 times in such a short period, but it is used enough that it makes me look at it and sort of wonder if maybe Lovecraft could have picked a different word that would have given more expression to the story.
Mm.
That would be sort of, if I was marking this, I would sort of make that a point and be like, are you sure you want to use the same word again? Is there a better word or a different word that you could use, or is there some reason why you think it's important to reuse this?
Well, maybe this could came from the fact that he was reading a lot, but he wasn't being corrected. What I remember reading about Lovecraft is that he was studying at home,
Mm-hmm.
and he wasn't actually being corrected, and maybe that's why he didn't have like the exact way of writing. He was just like reading, and maybe he got really old stories in that private library that he had access to,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting side note about him is that when he would submit stories, I think to Weird Tales,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes or often the editor would send them back with some notes and say, you should change this and that. And apparently what Lovecraft did a few times was just waited a few months and
Uh-huh.
then submitted exactly the same thing again and said, hey, I made these changes for you, and the editor would accept them.
Wow. Well, he was trying to put his point out. That's
Yeah.
for sure. If it was wrong, if it was right, he didn't care. He just wanted it out.
Yeah, he probably disagreed with the changes that were being suggested. He's like, well, I've already done the job, and I'm the writer here, so
Yeah, you just accept it and
yeah,
publish it. That's it.
yeah.
Okay, so do you think there is another point that we have to like check in this chapter?
I can't think of anything else to mention.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited about the next one, the Tomb Legions.
Yeah, that's the last one, and we
That's
should
right.
read it until next Tuesday, right?
That's right. That's right.
Ah, great, great, great.
Anybody that has already read it is a naughty boy.
Exactly, exactly. And it's not going to spoil the end. Especially that. It's not going to spoil the end. So, this is the end of the live stream. I am really grateful that we did this today. It was really nice. It was, I don't know, every time that we are reading one of the chapters from Lovecraft, especially this story, it just changed the way that you think about the story. And it's nice and it's refreshing just to talk about it for a little bit. So I hope that everyone that will be watching this live stream will be also intrigued about this ending, because I'm really intrigued about what is going to happen and what's going to bring the narrator and Herbert West to the story in this last chapter that it's called, again, The Tombed Legions. So, thank you, Nicholas, for being here. Thank you for commenting this story with me. And if you have something else to say, please do.
Thanks for having me. It's been great again, and I really look forward to people in the future seeing these. By the way, you might want to put the link in the live chat before you close the video.
True, true. I should put it like, there you go.
There you go, folks. So anybody that wants to read it for themselves, it's right there.
Yeah, and especially because it's open, it's public, you can read it, and then you can go ahead, and if you want to leave any comment in this live stream, don't worry, just do it. We're going to comment as well. And well, just keep on watching us for the next time on Tuesday. It's the same time, around 10 my time. It's around 9 your time, I think it was starting, right, Nicholas?
Right, but they don't even know our time zones, so that's probably irrelevant to them.
Well, right now we're ending around 11:27. So well, we will have to try and check how that could work. But anyways, I am really thankful for everyone that is going to be watching this live stream. Please catch us live next Tuesday at night, and let's just finish this story. So thank you, and I hope to see you guys soon.